Well, hello there. This is Bradley Sowash with my improv tip of the month. This one is about from story to sound, how to inspire improvisation in 5 easy steps. Have you ever noticed that a movie score can influence the way you feel about a particular scene? Musicians and music teachers are aware of this. Sometimes other people or younger music students haven't really noticed that their moods are being manipulated, skillfully by the directors. So, for example, if I were to play a soundtrack like this, and it will perhaps be reminiscent of something you've heard before, without being exactly on so that I don't ruffle any copyright feathers, what kind of a mood does this bring to mind? Don't name the movie, but does that give you a heroic feeling? It's got that heroic march feel. Here's another one. Maybe that brings to mind an intergalactic feeling. So I'm just doing a little tip of the hat to some famous themes. But if we do, maybe let's say there's a romantic scene and the storm is out and the couple is having troubles, and we hear this. You can hear how that is not heroic or intergalactic, right? So music has moods, and it shows up even in cartoons for young improvisers and young students. I realize that particular cartoon reference, it might be a little old for some of us. The younger students may not still watch that show about a certain family who lived in a stone house. So sometimes the music creates the mood, as I've been demonstrating just right here. We have the moods that the music can suggest, but also you see in soundtracks the sort of onomatopoeic, if I can use a word, I think that's a word, where the music mirrors the action directly. So, for example, if we have, we're accompanying a nature film that has a tightly focused fall leaf, maybe it sounds like this, with a little descending scale passage. You can see the leaf coming down. So sometimes it's a mood, and sometimes it's a specific, Mickey Mousing, which is the word that the dance community uses when the music directly reflects what the dancers are doing, or a choreographer directly reflects the music. You say, well, that's Mickey Mousing, and of our collective familiarity with soundtracks and stories to inspire improvisation with an imagined story. You can adjust this as you like, and I know some teachers are already creating methods to do this kind of thing using stories and movies and things like that. So here's my 5 steps, and you can vary this any way you like. Number 1, write out an outline of a brief story. In other words, make up the story first. In a pinch, yes, you could use Red Riding Hood or Cinderella or Snow White or some popularly known story, but that gets to be very elaborate. Often those stories are kind of long, and there's the first bear and the second bear and the third bear, or the wolf meets her there, and so on. We just want a short little story, and maybe with an eye to knowing that it's about to be musical. So if you're working with a younger student, they might say, I went up in the rocket ship and landed on the moon. That's not enough. We need a little bit of detail, a little bit of mood, a little bit of action. I'll give you an example of that in just a minute. But I advise writing your own story just with a few outline points. What happened? You can do that, send that home as an assignment, or do that in the lesson. And if you are an improviser and not a music teacher, do it for yourself. I try to speak to both populations. So number 1, write an outline of a brief story. Number 2, improvise accompaniments as you, or someone else ideally, reads the story aloud line by line with pauses between. So if somebody reads the story line by line with some pauses, that leaves a little room for music. And at this point, we're not interested in sort of how making it all come together in a comprehensive way. We're just interested in using this to, at this moment, explore what might be available. So here's an example of a silly little story that I wrote for this day. It was a dark and stormy night. How am I going to indicate storm on the piano? Maybe I just put a tremolo down low. That seems to me threatening, you know. And that could actually be played by, if you're a teacher, you could just do that just to set the tone. So it was a dark and stormy night. There was some, some emotion in your voice. And the rain dripped from the leaves throughout the forest. So what would dripping rain sound like? And these are all teachable moments. So, if a student thinks this is silly and goes and just starts hitting the piano, you're like, whoa, those are big raindrops. It's important when you teach creativity not to correct, rather to comment on what you hear. Geez, those sound like logs coming out of the sky. Little laugh. Let's get more realistic. So I'm going to just do some random raindrops, and I'm going to use all the notes that I want. Black keys, white keys. I don't really know how this is going to come out. Just a little rain. Maybe I'm not a very good piano player. It shows you just how random it is. I'm not worried about fingering. I'm worried about thinking about what rain might sound like. So there's my dripping rain music. And it said that low rumbles of thunder could be heard in the distance. So let's add some thunder in the left-hand range, and maybe I will just do a full hand. All right, now this may seem nonsense, and it may seem like there's nothing teaching going on. I'm going to drive to that answer in a minute. So it's very 20th century sounding, right? Maybe where a student says, I don't like that so much, then just pull it into all white keys. We got a little more tonality that way. There's some thunder. Now, a little mouse lightly skittered up and down all around, looking for somewhere dry. What does a mouse skittering sound like, and how is it different from raindrops? Well, that's an interesting teachable moment. Raindrops tend to fall down, don't they? But mouse skitterings go up and down. And now maybe, since I have the capability on a digital keyboard, it suggests more of a plucky sound, so I'll use an acoustic guitar. A little skittering mouse. In the distance, the mouse could hear low, steady drums. Now notice how this brings in the implication of a steady beat, and that's going to be like kind of a teacher trick, that now we aren't just filling sound, we're looking for a steady beat. So let's just provide that for the student or ask them to do it. So I'm just doing A's here. I'm making this up as I go here. A, C, D. Okay. The mouse could hear those steady drums. And after a time, a wooden flute joined the drums. So what does a flute imply on the piano? Is it high or is it low? Maybe it's high, of course, as a flute would sound, and it's kind of an exotic flute. So I'm going to switch to a flute sound for a minute. Keep it simple. E, D, E. That's the heart of it, and then a wiggle. E. Just trying to get that exotic sound. If we want to get more exotic and we know enough about that, maybe we'll use a harmonic minor. Not too much, lest it sound too Middle Eastern. Okay, so this is all just an example of illustrating a story. Okay, the mouse ran down a hill. I'm going to go back to piano for that. The mouse ran down a hill towards the music, hoping to find shelter. Running down the hill. How is running different? See how that implies tempo, or at least shorter note durations? We could do it in a sequencing way like this, or we could just have fun with glissandi, because who doesn't love glissandi? The mouse ran down the hill, hoping to find shelter. Suddenly, the music stopped. In the clearing was a large hut. The mouse quietly tiptoed toward the door. How does quiet imply something? It implies, pianissimo. Little 5-finger, A, B, C, D, E. Many people were seated around a bonfire. Maybe there's a fire sound. An old man got up and began a slow, strange dance. A dance implies a steady rhythm, so we can go back to our... or some other bass line, A, G, A, F, G, or whatever you like. And then the man began to tell a story. And the story he began with started with this. It was a dark and stormy night. The rain dripped from the leaves throughout the forest. Okay, so I came full circle there. The thing is, this is not enough. So let's take it some more steps. That was fun, but that doesn't really constitute a lesson where learning has happened. If the goal is, gee, I had fun with my teacher today, we did a story and we built some rapport and we opened the door to improvisation, that's good. Maybe this is the next lesson, maybe it's the same lesson, you decide you know how to pace this. But I think taking some further steps makes this much more teachable, and there are takeaways and learnable by following a few more steps. So we've gone through, to reiterate, 5 steps to inspiring improvisation with a story. Number 1 was write an outline of a brief story with an exaggerated emphasis on moods and sounds, and then improvise accompaniments to that story with teacher accompaniment and some prompting. The third, and I believe the most important step of the 5, is to extract the teachable moments. To extract the teachable moments. Now, if you're an individual improviser, this means just noticing what you played that you liked and say, I want to do that again. I want to hold on to that for the future. If you're a teacher, it means naming the musical elements. So, for example, were we in major or minor? Why did that sound, why did all the white keys with me playing A down low sound kind of dark and scary? You know, well, that's minor. Great time to emphasize that teachable moment about modality. Or maybe it went major at some point. Other things, forte piano. Remember the little skittery mouse who creeped to the door? What do we call that? Is it piano? Is it pianissimo? We have a name for that. When the thunder boomed, what do we call that? Is it forte? Is it triple forte? You know, see, we're naming the things. You get the idea. High and low for beginners. Direction, moving high and low. We're talking register and direction. So if we name these things, we have turned what was just a fun kind of experience into something, you know, teachable. Here's one more. Did we play melodies? Basically single notes in sequence. Or did we play chords, notes combined? Those are clusters. How are clusters different from the conventional chords we've studied? You get the idea. Extract those teachable moments so that we have not just learning, but we also have a name for what we did. And when you name something, you can hang on to it. I like to say verbalization is crystallization. Name it, and now we can hold it. The 5 steps to inspire improvisation with a story or imagined soundtrack. The first one was to write an outline of a brief story with an emphasis on mood and action that would suggest sounds. Number 2, we improvised accompaniments to that. Number 3, we extracted the names and the teachable moments and gave things names. Sometimes it wouldn't even have a name. What were we going to call this so we can remember it? Now, the 4th step is to repeat the music minus the reading aloud to create a story-inspired improvised instrumental. So if I look at the same story but don't tell you about it, we kind of have how I grew up with a crazy musical family who, when we drove anywhere, we'd listen to classical music, and my older brothers and my parents would narrate, you know, it's Wagner or whatever, and they'd say, oh, here comes the Viking ship, dun, 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 and they're moving to the distance. My little boy mind was lighting up, seeing all these scenes. So we're going to suggest those scenes without all the music underneath there. And to make that more musical, you as the teacher can play a hand drum, and that's one of the things we do at 88 Creative Keys is do a drumming for teachers. Or you can provide some kind of an accompaniment. I'll just quickly show you this. I love to use this on my left foot, which is a patented tobarine that teachers teach with by putting this on their left foot. And I happen to have under my right foot a bass drum here because I like to do that and mix and match them. So, you know. So you wouldn't have to do all those things, but maybe you're doing the drum or the tobarine. Or you could use just a backing track. The idea is to take these ideas and mold them into time. Music exists in a pulse, right? So if a student is capable of internalizing a pulse and bringing it forth, then that's terrific. If not, we can help them out a little bit with just a loop. So I have on my digital piano here, I happen to have, this is a rumba slowed down. So we now have, a little bit of drums going on. And let me just then, try a little bit of this. So it was a dark and stormy night, right? Listen how this changes it, Low rumbles of rain dripping down. So now I have that. So now it sounds more musical, but we aren't reading this anymore. But I'll tell you, here was a little mouse skittering, right? In the distance, the mouse could hear low, steady drums. Now we're becoming musical in a non-classical way that it seems more primal and more in keeping with the quality of the story, and so on. I'm not going to go through the whole tune, but we've now turned this into a sort of a soundtrack or through composed improvisation. So repeat the music minus reading aloud as the fourth step. To make it more musical, you want to bring in some kind of accompaniment or steadiness, okay? The last step ultimately is that you decide what you're going to do. Here are some options. So you could refine your improvisation into a full composition. Maybe this now leads to the pen, and believe me, there's no better way to refine your music reading skills than to notate original music. Working on that backwards really gets that thing together. At least for me, when I started to write my music down, my reading improved immediately. And reading for an improviser at heart is not something that comes naturally. So that is why you, who perhaps are a reader at heart and feels a little scared of improvisation, should do it anyway, because it's the same for us ear players. I had to struggle through reading. I barely made it into music school. My sight reading was so awful. And I worked on it. I worked on my weaknesses, and you should too, if I can be a little soapboxy. So what's next? Refine your improvisation into a composition. Record it perhaps. Make this musical story something that's in GarageBand or similar recording software where there are those loops where you can put down a drum beat and put these ideas in. And it can be, this then turns into a camp or a longer term project or composition project where you're writing, in a sense, a soundtrack to an imaginary movie. Just try a new story. Next week, that's a simple thing to do. Next, let's keep a real cheerful, happy story. What happens if, whatever, you can come up with a happy story with some illustrative moments. Another trick to do is accompany an actual movie with the sound turned off. Select some scene or a little bit of a YouTube thing or whatever of something that funny happens. A cat climbs up a tree and falls in a swimming pool. How would the music go with that? Or how about telling an improvised music story without any pre-written narrative, and then doing it in reverse? What narrative does it suggest? So if I'm playing, what is this suggesting? Student says it reminds me of, I don't know, a circus. I always end the same way. It's inspired by an old nature show I used to love, and I get a kick out of how corny this is. Here we go. It is. Until next time, enjoy your creative music making journey.